Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the New Mainstream podcast. I'm your host, Mario Carrasco. Today, so happy to have a return guest, Maribel Lara. She is a transformational brand communications leader, extensive experience advising global brands, but also working with entrepreneurs, including your time working at VaynerMedia. Now you are a founder. I reached out to you at a great time. I believe you just launched, so channeling all that experience into your new consulting company. And you're one of the few return guests, so welcome back.
Oh, I feel honored. And you got a sneak peek because we chatted in January and you were like, come back. And I was like, heads up, it'll be different.
That's right. Yeah. So, we last time we talked to you, I'm remembering our podcast. We were just catching up. It was in Los Angeles. VaynerMedia is old, I guess, LA office. It's not there anymore. But tell us about your career. I mean, back then it was incredible, and now you have, I think it's been about 8 years. Like, walk us through your journey at VaynerMedia. Like, and then I think that was even when we talked. Maybe you had just started at the Sasha
Group. Yeah. Okay. So the quick and dirty is I started my career in higher education. And that's important to mention because it's actually how I got my eyes in the social media space. I had been working at an Ivy League institution, and my students had early access to Facebook because Facebook started at Harvard. And then the next wave of people who had access to Facebook was anyone with an ivyleague.edu address. And that included my students. And they started using Facebook to promote events. And I was like, how are you getting so many people to show up? And they were like, there's this thing called Facebook. So they introduced me. So that coincided with me trying to think about like what was next for me in my career. I had been working in higher ed for nearly a decade, and it became really clear that moving up the ladder like was moving away from the thing I loved most about it, which was the one-to-one work with students. But I also had to think about like, I'm 30 years old. I live in New York City. Like, I can't afford to live in the city and take care of myself on an educator's salary. And so I had made the decision to go back to school full time for my MBA, right? I was just like, if I examined my skill set, not the trajectory that I had taken, I felt that I had a really strong skill set in communications. I felt that I had an interest in marketing, even though I had never studied it. I went to a liberal arts college. I loved this idea of communications and the intersection of like communications and culture. I was a Latin American studies major. And so like I had all of these things flowing, and social media just seemed like such a tremendous opportunity. I knew enough from having worked in higher education that was not the natural trajectory for working in marketing. You work in marketing, you study marketing or business, and you go into the agency world like right out of your bachelor's degree, and you like work your way up the ladder. I was not that. And I knew that people would not want to touch me, right? Like, so I knew that going into it, but I was just like, this social media space, I think that this is the next big thing, right? Like we had already been experiencing Google and Google AdWords, like the implications of just the internet and search marketing, right? Like, and just what search had done for us, like as consumers. And I thought there was something to social media. And I was just like, nobody can say they're an expert. This thing is so new. So like maybe that's the opportunity for me to carve out my own path, because like I could become an expert along with anybody who already works in marketing. So that was my thesis. And so I went to business school. And wherever I could, because you couldn't take classes in social. Most graduate programs at that point in time had one course in digital marketing, and it wasn't being taught by practitioners in the space, and it was changing so quickly, as anything technology related does. So that course wasn't even like, there was a lot of educating myself on the space, which is still what we have to do today, right? Because of how quickly it changes. So interestingly, timeline-wise, to bring this back to Vayner, I graduated with my MBA in 2009, which is when Gary started VaynerMedia, right? So like I was starting on my like journey with social media at the same time that Gary was starting with his. I started as a consultant because nobody wanted to hire me at a traditional agency. Clearly, Gary was much better at building a business than I was at that point in time. But I started by like making myself my own portfolio. Right? So I started as a blogger. I created my own social like platforms. Like it's how I networked. Eventually, I got my foot in the door in the agency world, and I started from the bottom, like the same role that somebody right out of college with a bachelor's degree would have gotten. And I had a bachelor's degree from a top university and two master's degrees, and I started at the same level. And I just believed that like all I had to do was get my foot in the door, and that once I was inside a company, I would be able to show how smart I was and what I was capable of, and eventually I'd be able to like course correct salary and title. Was hard, but I did it, right? Like, and I had the advantage of like having the support of my family. So like a good Latina, I went back home living with my parents, right? So like I had food on the table and I didn't have to pay
And
rent.
they love that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Like my parents were my best friends when I still had them, right? So like I was the good Latina daughter, but like I say that because I think it's important, especially like, you and I talk a lot about like dynamics. It's not so easy when you have responsibilities to take the free internship or to take that entry level job. I had the benefit of doing that because my parents were willing to support me in my dream, right? And in my aspirations. So I give thanks that I was in a supportive place where I could do that. Eventually, like I was recruited to go to VaynerMedia. I was open to opportunity. I had been at Group M, the holding company, for about 3.5 years. And it was time. The small agency that I was part of was merging with another one. I wanted to continue focusing on social. And Vayner, in those days was still very, like, still nascent. They had like 350 employees in 2014, which is when I started there. Gary had a reputation as the bad boy of marketing, right? Because he was telling everybody who worked in traditional marketing that social was the future, and they all thought he was crazy. He wasn't accepted because he didn't come from the industry. And I really felt at home there because I didn't come from the industry either. I felt at home there because I felt like they were, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like that's about experience. And Gary was into that, right? Like if you look at the staff in 2014 when I started, there were comedians who were copywriters at VaynerMedia, because guess what? You have to be really smart and a really good writer to be a good comedian. So why wouldn't you leverage that skill set, right? Like there were folks who came from
And I
so
have to
many.
say one thing about your story too, like that I find multiple people, some of the best marketers I've talked to, have a liberal arts background like yourself, right? And because at the end of the day, yeah, you were interested in technology and social, but it's about storytelling.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when
I
you
want to
get
do this,
that,
which I picked up in Mexico.
yeah,
So
when you
yes,
get
yes,
that,
yes, yes, yes.
it's like exactly like when you get that, I think, because I also like I have a master's in literature, right? And similarly to you, like I was working at a high school, um, which was great, but it like I had I didn't at the time I didn't think about the money thing, and then I realized, you know what, I do want to.
Yeah. I want to own a house one day,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So, but like I at first thought I was behind, which I was time wise. But flash forward now, thought leadership content has been a core of our company,
Yes.
and I wouldn't have been able to do that without my degree. And I think similarly to you, right? Like you've been able to lean on that education, so it didn't go to waste. I think it really differentiated you.
Thank you for pointing that out. And I think it'll come up at different points during our conversation, right? Like it's part of why I felt comfortable going out on my own in a consultancy, is because I feel like I'm able to check the box on a variety of skill sets and I wasn't siloed in my experience. So, like that so Vayner was a great place because they were welcoming of people from different experiences, and that came to life in like for me, really importantly, in terms of I didn't walk a traditional path into marketing. And that was what we needed in those days, right? Because we were trying to do something that was really different from what the industry was doing. So early days was social media, right? Like it was managing social media profiles for really big brands. Quaker was one of my key clients for the first 2.5 years there. I built a reputation of being really good at strong teams and strong client relationships, and that reputation paid off. Gary asked me 2.5 years into my being at the company to work directly for him in a capacity that was similar to a chief of staff. There were four of us, so we were like a team of chiefs of staff, to really like bridge the gap. He didn't have a robust C-suite at that time. I think he really had like two people like at a senior level. So we were sort of bridging the gap until he built that C-suite. But what that allowed me to do that was then also like be part of conversations for how we grew the business, right? And like how we brought his vision to life of like not just VaynerMedia, but this holding company called VaynerX and all of these pieces that could be part of it. So I was working directly for him when he launched the first company, the first like sister company to VaynerMedia. And I also got to be part of the initial consulting offerings like in the Vayner world. And that's where I started to work directly with entrepreneurs. Gary being the first entrepreneur I got to work directly with. But then our first consulting clients were entrepreneurial ventures, right? Like companies that were not big enough to hire VaynerMedia as their agency, right? Like they weren't big enough to work with an agency, period, but where Gary felt like we could have an impact on their business. And so it was really like I got to leverage my MBA. I didn't get a master's in marketing. I got an MBA, right? So I understand operations. I have like a finance and accounting background. Like I wanted to understand business holistically. I didn't just want to understand marketing. And so working with smaller ventures gave me the opportunity to really do business consulting with marketing as part of that. That experience then, like I loved that so much that
That
I
that
had
was the Sasha group, right? To
it was what became the Sasha group. So
okay.
so I loved that so much. I raised my hand to Gary and I said, I love this consulting piece. If you want to do more with like this size company, like please, I'm your girl. Like I'm here. And so fast forward, oh my gosh, now I'm gonna like mess up my dates. Fall 2018. Gary gives me the opportunity. He decides he's going to create a new company called the Sasha Group, named after his father. That the Sasha Group is going to be an agency to work with companies that aren't yet ready to be VaynerMedia clients, but it's also going to have a consulting arm to work with some of these smaller companies that I had started working with. And I was asked to lead the consulting department at the Sasha Group. And so I got the opportunity to be an intrapreneur, which now is a term I embrace, right? Like you're building something new within an established organization. So you're still getting to dabble in the entrepreneurial world, now granted with a safety net because you're within a larger holding company. But we didn't have consulting offerings. So I had to develop consulting offerings. I had to price them. I had to sell them when we had very limited experience in consulting, which is all very entrepreneurial. So I did that for 6 years. The interesting part of my journey was last year, I got a super unique opportunity. Gary had a change in leadership for the VaynerMedia Mexico office, and I was asked to move to Mexico for a 6 to 12 month commitment until we were able to find a permanent lead for that office. And so that for me was the opportunity to like test out my operational chops. So I went from running this small consulting team. I had led big teams in the past, but this was like, go run this office of 40 plus people across departments, right? Like make sure that they
But that's like
understand.
more than an operational thing too. I want to make clear to people, like,
Yeah.
because we have a Mexico City
Oh, it's cultural.
office. It's a completely different way to do business. I mean, talk about that.
Oh
I'm
my
sure you
gosh.
were.
It requires humility. First, and to be successful, it requires humility because you really have to go in there and say like, yes, I have 10 years of experience in Vayner, and I know how we do things. I am Latina, but I am not raised in Latin America. And I'm also not Mexicana, right? My mother was from Peru, my father was Chile. So my references are South American in terms of like how I grew up. I know a lot of folks who are Mexican, but that does not make me Mexican. That does not give me an understanding. And a lot of my friends are Mexican American, which is also a different experience. So I think that my success was partly based on the humility to just be able to say, I have no idea what you meant by that. Or like, that's not funny to me. And I understand that there's context missing. So like being willing to say, I have no idea what that means, or like, I'm missing the joke, or like, what does that reference mean? Like, and say, I don't know, can you teach me? Right. And realizing
And
that
that's
you're,
easier said than done, right? That as an executive, as someone, so I think
yeah.
that's a really great lesson. Like it's, you're saying, and I know you, so I know your vibe, so you could do that, but it's a very difficult thing to practice that. So like, that's a big deal. And I think every leader can learn from that.
So I think I'll share with you this, which was I walked away realizing whoever is in that role to be successful, you have to be a tremendous advocate. Like you're talking about a small office that's part of a larger organization that's predominantly US based. When I left, right before I went, I was told everybody speaks English. And I was like, okay. And then you go and you realize everybody speaks English the way that I speak Spanish. And what I mean by that is, look, my degree is in Spanish and Latin American studies, right? So like I was reading and writing like papers at a university level in Spanish. That still is very different than doing business in Spanish and using it day to day. My Spanish is very good, right? And like I had no problem working in Mexico, right? Like I was understood. And like yes, there was some dust to run off, but I was educated and raised in an English world, English speaking world, an English first world. My vocabulary and my ability to dominate the English language is nothing, right? Like that, and like that is like miles ahead of what I'm capable of doing in Spanish, right? And so I part of what I had to do was advocate for the team there and explain to folks, at our holding company level, like, hey, I want you to understand something. You, unless you learn Spanish, will never see these employees at their best because their communication with you requires them to navigate a language that is not their first language. And they're able to do that, but they're never able to show you their best. I have seen their best because I see them present in their native language to folks in their community. So just know you're always going to be missing something, right? And that's why it's super important that that office was run by somebody who was a Mexican national, because they would understand like what best was and could adjust to our culture. But that's why it's important.
Yeah, and then there's the whole aspect. There's the language thing, which is huge,
Mm-hmm.
but um, I think a thing for me that's and similar to you. I mean, we haven't spoken in Spanish, but I know your Spanish is better than mine. Um, but I get along, and I have like 80-90% of my meetings in Spanish now. Um, but the way of doing business in Mexico it's so different, and I would say,
Everybody tells you everything is okay,
yeah, but
and
yeah,
it may
yes,
not be.
everyone, yeah, it's very non-confrontational.
Yes.
Um, but it's also just I feel like it's literally the opposite of America. Like
Mm.
we're short, to the point, transactional, and over there it's a thing. It's more drawn out. It's relationship based. It's You would never in the first meeting say, "Hey, yeah, here's what we want." It's like I don't know. It's a totally different way of doing business, which I'm still learning.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on the culture. Like I learned very quickly. Everyone will tell you everything is fine because they don't want to ruffle feathers. Like they don't want to be, right, like the sore thumb. They don't want to stand out. They don't want to cause trouble. And so what helps me was the ability to build trust, right? Like my willingness to like show my vulnerability and like share my story, like help people understand that it was safer, but also just like you have to communicate that you realize it's different and that you need the team to educate you, right, on things. Like you have to realize that you are reliant on your team that is from there to teach you the ways. As much as you have things to show them, they have things to show you.
For sure. And what it like? Tell me about what was that office doing? Were they selling Vayner services to Latin American clients? Is that
Yes.
the okay?
Yeah.
Cool.
And I mean, the benefit for our global offices is like we have a lot of clients in the US who have global operations. And so, Vayner has like the benefit of like, hey, we work with this brand and we work with them in multiple markets. So it's like you sort of have the relationship procurement. It loves that, right? Like if you can expand the relationship across markets. So right now, it's very much that. But then they'll grow and they'll bring on more Mexican national brands as they grow.
Cool. And so was that your last kind of stop at?
I came back in August, and I came back to the Sasha group, which has grown. So it has grown tremendously in revenue. The ambitions are even bigger because of like how Vayner's reputation has grown. Sasha really has the opportunity to be what's called in our industry a conflict shop, right? Meaning like Sasha has the capability of working with clients that are just as big as some of the VaynerMedia clients, where VaynerMedia might not be able to because they already have a client in that category, right? So it would be a conflict for VaynerMedia, like not a conflict for the Sasha group, which has, different P&L, like different staff, etc. So all of that is wonderful for Gary and wonderful for Vayner. It was not great for me because as our clients got bigger, I was moving away from working with the clients that I had a passion for working with, the smaller clients. And so I have actually known for several years that when I left, when it was time to leave, I wanted to continue consulting. I wanted to consult with smaller companies and small to mid-market business is such a ginormous range. And I know how to work with small and I know how to work with mid-market. The objective is to do that. But I realize I'm able to do it at a more affordable price point as an entrepreneur, as a solopreneur, because I don't have the same overhead that an agency does. So going back to Sasha was my last role within the Vayner world, and I left with Gary's support and his blessing to even go back and potentially work with some of my previous clients who are no longer able to work with Sasha as it's grown up.
Oh, that's amazing. And so tell us what's the name of your consulting and what is like what's your thesis? What's your mission statement?
Yeah, so Beget Love Consulting, twofold. The phrase Beget Love came to me in 2016, and I have proof of it. I have a pair of Nike sneakers that I ordered, and I have Beget Love like printed on them. I still have those sneakers. And that idea came to me. So beget, right, means to like bring forth. It's used a lot in terms of like literally giving birth to a human being. I am not a mother. I chose not to be, but I do believe that like actions can be actions that come from a place of love. I lost my parents in back to like within 10 months of each other in my early 30s. They were young. They were in their 60s, right? Like they weren't even 65 yet. And so that to me really awakened this passion for like, we have no idea how much time we are promised. I want to believe that it's going to be long, but because I have no idea, then I want to make every moment worth it, right? Like my parents loved being around people. Like I know their legacy because of how many people showed up when they passed away. And I was just like, isn't that the best, right? Like living a life where like people show up for you when they have good things to say about you. And I think that work should be the same way. We spend so much of our time at work. Why shouldn't that also be something that we love to do? And my switch from higher ed to marketing was because I was falling out of love with higher ed and I saw the potential to love what I was doing in marketing. All of these different roles that I've held, like in the Vayner world, were all about like moving and following the thing that I was passionate about doing. My final decision to leave Vayner was about following the thing that I loved doing. The interconnection to marketing is in this landscape where there is so much noise and there are so many options within any given service or product category. The thing that helps a brand stand out is an emotional connection. The brands that will be here tomorrow, years from now, will be the brands that are able to evoke a strong emotion like love, right? Like the emotion is the thing that cuts through in storytelling, in brand building. And so that is my objective with Beget Love Consulting, is to help clients really build out mission, vision, values, right, that are based on that, on an emotional connection with their customer or their consumer, to develop marketing strategies that will evoke that and help them achieve those business objectives, and to advise them in the execution of those strategies or the implementation of those strategies.
That's great. And what's like a I can think of some, but like what's in your opinion, what are some companies, and they don't have to be necessarily well known, that are connecting emotionally to customers right now in your opinion?
So my current favorite example, and I love using current examples because we see this stuff happen every day. There is a brand called Hello Dani, Dani, that I was not familiar with 3 weeks ago. Okay, so Black woman owned, and design based. So she designs journals, prints, stickers, etc. She worked really hard and had her products carried at Target. For anyone who's been paying attention to the news, Target, they may be switching gears now, but Target, about a week and a half ago, announced that they were moving away from their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Um, that is, this founder who is a woman of color and who creates a lot of products that like reflect her, her Black background and culture, was just like, that is not values aligned with me as a brand, and made the incredibly like difficult and bold decision, to cease her relationship with Target. So she was just like, what they've got in stock is what they have. Like, I'll be moving away from this. I won't go into, for folks who don't understand, like the work that is involved for a small brand to get in the door of a massive retailer like Target.
Yeah, it's like I'm like that is wow. I mean, it makes me want to buy from her, honestly.
Well, so here's the thing. She went to social and posted on all of her social platforms the decision that she had made. In the span of 1 week, she had projected what her losses would be for the next 12 months by pulling out of Target. In the week since she made that decision and shared it on social, like got vulnerable and told everybody what she was doing, she multiplied in revenue what she projected her loss over the next 12 months would be.
Wow,
Like
that's
I
incredible.
mean, that to me is like, if you truly live your values, right? Like, your community will come through for you. You don't need everybody to come through for you. Like, this idea of like, it always cracks me up when people are like, the market is this big. I'm just like, but what percentage of the market, like realistically, right? Like, you don't need the whole market. She didn't
Right.
need the whole market. I responded to her LinkedIn. I was like, I didn't know your brand before, but I'm so happy that I do now. I went and I bought a journal from her, and apparently a lot of people did the same thing, that right? Like, you're just like, I want to go buy from her. A lot of people felt that way. Like, to be true to your values and to share that story will pan out for you.
No, it's true, and I don't know if I shared this with you. Well, one about maybe we can talk about this D and I thing if relevant, but it's interesting you brought that, Target up, because people would ask me, similar to how I asked you about what brand is doing it right from an emotional perspective. I would get people ask me all the time, what company's doing it right from a diverse marketing or multicultural. And I always would say Target. And I used to know the consumer insights person at Target, and he has a fantastic episode, by the way. Um, he was just great, and he talking about how important diversity was and how it started with the people that worked at the store. To see Target move away from that was tough, because like I mentioned it so many times on the podcast. Um, it sounds like my wife was telling me last week, like, because we stopped shopping there,
Yeah.
that it sounds like a lot of people have made that same decision and they're thinking about reversing.
I
We'll
mean,
see.
I'll tell the other part of that, which is Costco, who stood by their values, right? Despite hearing from consultants that they should move away from their DEI like efforts and programming, they were like, no, we're gonna do this because this is the right thing to do. My understanding is like I cannot wait until like Q1 reports come out. Like I want to see how Costco does, but my understanding is they have far greater number of new memberships than they've had memberships that they've lost. So like people put their money where their values are.
100%. And I mean, that's full circle to what you do, right? It's like helping companies bring that out. And the other thing I was going to share too is like, think now, since the onset, we've been a company to help uh, Fortune 500 companies tap into the voice of diverse consumers, right? And I think for a long time, we consider ourselves apolitical and, about the research. But after 2016, we were like, no, we're going to lead with our values. And that has changed the company and helped us grow in ways that we never thought possible. So it's like really a testament to what you're talking about, right? Just being, once we started to just be who we are and have the company reflect that, it was just a game changer for us.
Yeah, I if I'm looking for glimmers of hope and things to look forward to, which can be hard in this climate, like I really do think we're in for a reckoning, right? Like I really do think like what you and I have been talking about for years, which is like this is a very powerful, like these are very powerful like sets of consumers, right? Like and they're looking for brands that live their values, and they're looking for folks who like truly like care about us and not just like in terms of facade. Like I think we're going to see a reckoning over the next like couple of years of like what we've been trying to tell people of like don't just do it because you think you right, like because you're checking a box, like do it because you really care about it, and like don't do it for a year, like people can sniff it out, like commit to it. The brands that have truly committed to it, the brands that truly live that, I think are going to do really well over the next several
Yeah.
years.
I mean, and the Costco thing, because one is, I think everyone's battling with how do you find real information because you just see headlines. And what was super helpful, somebody on LinkedIn actually put the board like reports of the response that Costco had, and like what, why people should vote for taking away their DNI, and they put the arguments and then against, and it was like there it was, and plain like from Costco board, like, nah, no, this is what our consumers want, and this is, and that was really cool to see in writing in an official document.
That's amazing. More of that.
Yes, and I mean, and I think, I mean, what's cool too. One thing I didn't mention, like, I know, maybe Gary and VaynerMedia at the beginning didn't necessarily. It wasn't about DNI, but I always felt like they were inclusive by nature of what they were doing and who it was hiring. Right.
Yeah. Look, it I wouldn't have stayed for 10 plus years if I didn't feel that it was a place where I was valued. I think anybody who worked with me will tell you that I've always spoken my mind. I've said this over and over again. There is no place that's perfect because places like companies are full of humans and we are imperfect, right? Like that's part of our beauty is our imperfections. So yeah, there's been stuff that like ruffled my feathers, and what was great about Vayner was that I was always able to vocalize it, and that there were folks who were willing to hear me out. And that like there was consistent effort, right? Like, but I mean, there is no place that's perfect, and this is all about constant work, right? Like it is work. Like any relationship, it's work. You don't just do it. There's no set it and forget it. It is like how day in and day out are you like living and practicing this, and like there are going to be days where you're not as great.
Yeah. Well, talking about work, so now you're an early stage founder. How does that feel? Like what like for the entrepreneurs that are starting, like you went from one of the most recognizable largest companies to now a solopreneur. How has that transition been for you?
I think that I was really fortunate to have skill sets that made me feel confident going into this. I ran my own P&L, right? Like I had to work on new business. I had the foresight to start building some semblance of a personal brand and like a personal identity outside of the VaynerMedia walls, right? Like just the fact that I was on your podcast, right? Like 5 or 6 years ago, like, and if you look me up, like there's a bunch of Google stuff that comes up, right? Like I've been on a bunch of podcasts. I've been on the advisory board for Luminary for like 6 years. No surprise, right? Like lots of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and small businesses that are part of the Luminary community. I've gone on the road with them for the last 3 years. So I've done like 5 different cities for the last 3 years, doing digital marketing one-on-one sessions for small to mid-market businesses in different cities around the country. So like people know me. People know my reputation, and they couldn't work with me before, but they could now. So like while it seems like this massive leap, in some ways I've been building my ability to do this and feel good about doing this for the last 6 years, right? So it's just like I essentially, this is my first week in business. So this is day 3 of being an entrepreneur, but I
So
already have a
are this the first podcast of
official,
Beget
yes,
Love?
my
All
first
right.
official podcast as a founder. But like I had my product offerings, I knew what I was charging for them. I mapped out like this is what I'm starting with, right? Because I need to make sure I can pay the bills, and I want to be able to work with smaller companies, but like that's got to come later because first I need to make sure I've got good financial footing. I know what that's going to look like, and so I'm going to map that out, right? I had a list of like people I needed to reconnect with, either just from a like I need to let people know what I'm doing, right? Like so the capabilities deck was huge because it's just like how can people help me if I don't have a clear understanding of what my initial offerings are, right? So, like, that was the first thing I had to do, even before a website, because I was just like, I could send that in an email, I could show somebody on the phone, and that'll be the foundation for a website, right? So, I felt really good about my ability to do it. So, now we're going to see.
So I want to recap some of the advice. I think that was really great for early founders. I said one, building your personal brand while you're at a company, because
Yes.
one, that helps the company like attract new clients, uh, prove that you're doing the work, that you're out there, that you're trustworthy. So but it also builds your personal brand. And then having a roadmap. I mean, I love that you haven't launched a website. I think so many founders obsess over the URL on the website. And for someone, with your experience to not focus on that and focus on your offering and your pricing, I think that's super important too, because I do some mentorship work too, and like people are like, "What do you think of this name or logo?" And it's like, what do you know? Don't even
I
think
had,
about that yet, right?
it's what's funny is I had the URL and the logo. So this goes back to like I've been building it for a while. I had the URL and the logo since 2018. And the initial idea for it was not that it would be my business name. It was like I was going to start like old school blog, right? Like and I was going to create content around like, same like premise of like love everything you do because life is too short. But when I decided I was going to leave, I was just like, well, I already have a logo and I already have the URL. Let's just use that. Like for the sake of efficiency, it works.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's perfect. Like, so what other advice now, now that you're in it, and obviously if you
Mm-hmm.
worked with a lot of founders, like if you top three things for aspiring entrepreneurs, like,
I mean, you got to know you got to know the numbers, right? Like, and I think when you're first launching, like my numbers that I had to understand is like, what are my expenses, right? Like, what are the expenses that are like non-negotiable? I have a mortgage that I need to pay. So I'm the primary like earner in my household. So it was a big decision, right? Like my husband and I had to talk this over and we had to assess like how many months could I do this with no income, right? Like, what is our runway for doing this? And like that could come from a number of different things. What is the minimum that I need to be making for this to be like viable to cover our expenses? And that requires sitting down and understanding what are the things that are true costs and what are the costs that you can cut, right? So it's just like, so you also need to ask yourself, how frugal can you live? I'm a girl from the New York City projects, right? So like I could be super freaking frugal, right? Like I can make a lot of things like stretch. Like I don't need to go. While I love eating out, I don't need to eat out. I could cook. My husband knows how to cook. I got a kitchen, right? Like there's also no shame in my game. I was telling my husband I was going back to like the days that I was like freelancing, trying to get my foot in the door in the agency world. I remember being able to survive for a week on a loaf of bread, some peanut butter and jelly, right? Like some pasta, a jarred sauce, and then I would go to free events for my meals. So like I know how to be savvy should I need to. So like understanding your numbers as a solopreneur is very
and
much
I think a good thing
understanding.
about numbers that you're talking about that people don't talk about is like your personal numbers. So
Yes.
there's the business numbers, but then there's like just taking an inventory of your life, because we separate this and it's like, oh no, these are the expenses. Here's what I can cut out. Like both sides of the equation, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, look, we have people we care for, and it's not always people that live in our house, right? Like, do you have family that you help support? Like, do you, right? Like, do people rely on you to contribute to something annually? Like, do you donate to organizations and that's important to you? Like, what are the things that you feel like you need to continue doing for you to be you? Your personal numbers, right? And I look, for me, my personal numbers are the numbers because I'm a solopreneur, right? I'm not employing anyone. But if you're planning on employing people, then you have to understand, like, realistically, how much money do you need to be able to bring in to continue to employ those people? Because now it's about more than just you. It's also like you've made a promise to these people, right? So I think it's also understanding at what point is it responsible for you to bring up staff. So there's so much in that, like understanding your numbers. But like if you haven't gone through the exercising of understanding, like realistically, what's the minimum you need to bring in? What's the ideal? And then what's the work that you have to do? Like how do you actually plan on bringing that in, right? Like I have a goal for what I want to be bringing in on average on a monthly basis, but consulting is a feast or famine space, right? So it's just like I could do really well the first half of the year and then it could be like really quiet for a while. So like how do you also plan ahead for that? Right? Like how do you like assess what your safety net is, assess what it is like you're projecting and please have that be real, right? Like I think I also mentor folks, and like one of the things that scares me is when people are just like, I'm gonna do 1 million in revenue this year, and I'm like, but what is that based on? Exactly. Like what did you do last year, and what are you doing differently this year to get you to, like, it's lovely to say that you're going to hit 1 million, but if you don't have a plan to actually get you to that million, then that's a, I don't know what, nobody's going to give you a loan based on that. So I think the numbers is the big part.
We were like, when we first started, we were doubling every year. So that was our projection. Yeah, we're just going to double every year. It's like year five, we're like, oh, damn, that didn't happen. Yeah.
No. Yes. So
But
I'm
yeah,
glad that you shared that too, because you're just like, yeah, things are gravy, right? Like you
yeah,
hadn't been forced to go through that exercise yet.
exactly. Exactly. We were just like, oh, yeah, these past 2 years, third year. And then, no, you have to invest time and money to hit your goals.
Yes. And people don't understand that making more money doesn't necessarily mean doing more of the same thing that you've been doing, right? Like making more, growing your company, one is like you have to evaluate, can you be more efficient at how you do things to increase your margin, but also like diversification. It's never a good idea to have all of your eggs in one basket, right? So like, okay, that thing has done really well for us. This is our skill set though. Like what are other things that what other products we can create or services we can offer, like based in the skill set that we already have and the reputation we've built on. Like how do we diversify like our revenue streams?
On that note, and we're almost at time, but I want to talk a little bit about what you see like the future of marketing and business. And I know that's one thing that VaynerMedia was really good at, kind of looking at
Mm-hmm.
trends. And I'm sure now one thing you're extending into Beget Love. Like, what are some things that we should be thinking about? Obviously, AI is a big thing, but yeah, what are some emerging either technologies or
Yeah.
trends that you think are coming out that we should be aware of?
So one is I do a ton of reading, right? So all of this comes from like what I've been reading most recently. So none of this is like me being like a teller of the future. But you see a lot of people, like people are thirsty for community. And I think we talk about these platforms as like communities really broadly. And I think that was more true in the early days of them. Now you see it in pockets. Part of why people gravitated towards TikTok so much and why there was so much like there's still so much like concern over what's going to happen to it is, as big as TikTok is, people felt like they were able to find their niche communities in TikTok. So I think that desire for community continues, right? Like it or not, regardless of what side you're on, like there's a lot going on in the world and not just in this country. There's just a lot going on, and community helps us get through that. And so like I think you'll continue to see the platforms building out these community features, right? We see it in the broadcast feature on Instagram. We see YouTube expanding the community tools in the community tab that's available there. I think we're also going to see, it feels like we're going to see continued like just breakup as like segmentation of platforms, which sort of goes into that community feel as well, right? Like I kind of want to feel like people, you're sensing from people that they want to be on a platform that is reflective of their values and the communities that they want to be part of. So what does that mean for marketers and what does that mean for those of us trying to help brands navigate that space? Is like there may be a whole lot more like segmentation. There may be a need to be on many more platforms than folks are, right? Like folks are already freaking out about like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn. Like you may have a world where it's double that. And depend, right? So like I think you have to be really smart about who it is that you're trying to reach. Like if you hadn't already realized that broad demographics like women, and like people this age doesn't work, you're in for a rude awakening, because like the more nuanced and layered segmentation is just going to become more and more important for you to be able to make smart decisions around like what platforms you put your effort and time into. So yeah, I think we're looking at like more platform options. I think the conversation over like decentralized social media platforms, right, that we're into now because of like Blue Sky and the eventual like image platform that Blue Sky will launch. So I think people getting more savvy around like what does that mean to be on a platform that's decentralized versus one that isn't. Yeah, I think AI becomes
What does
super
that mean on a
interesting.
high level, actually? Because Blue Sky is one where I'm like, there's too much social. I've been like, I shut down my ex account. I'm like, I gotta save my mental space a little bit. But I know Blue Sky is one that I have a lot of friends on. Like, what does that mean, decentralized?
So, meaning that, like, their source, my understanding, and I'm not an expert, but my understanding is like their source code is open. And so it actually allows people to build on, like, to it's almost like a community approach, right? Like to people being able to build on their platform. I don't think that plays out as much right now. Like I think that's just going to be a bigger conversation. I think you're going to have more people asking the same question you asked, is like, is that something I should care about? I think right now that makes more sense from a programming perspective. But why did people gravitate to Blue Sky, right? Like people gravitated towards Blue Sky because they were kind of fed up with like what they perceived as like a lack of values alignment with the other platforms that were established and bigger. And so what you see playing out on Blue Sky in terms of like who's there is people who wanted to almost cut ties or have another option to go to. So I don't think the decentralized portion of it has really played out yet, but I do think that it'll be a bigger conversation. So yeah, I think Blue Sky is right to launch an image app because you have people trying to get away from meta platforms. So, so
I didn't know they were launching. I mean, that makes total sense. But I didn't know they were launching one.
yeah, good. I
Is it
mean,
going to be
there's
Blue
stuff all over.
Sky?
No, it'll have a different name.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. Good to know.
Changing all the time.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was awesome catching up with you. Thank you so much. There's so much to take from here. So I hope the listeners enjoyed. If people, so I know you have a URL, but like if people want to connect with you more, like touch base with you, what's the best way to keep in contact with you?
My email is maribel@begetlove.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so folks can follow me there. They can message me there. So you can find me under my name on LinkedIn, and I'm Latina_Sweetie on other social platforms.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great catching up. And thank you everybody for listening.
Thanks, Mario.
Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.